Another thing I was fascinated with this particular piece was the shadows.
First of all, I want to ask you about this piece is unusual for you. I've seen a lot of your work in having a sort of more overt theme than some of your other work, and we can talk about that. But I actually wanted to get to the point of it coming in some ways out of your own experience. I actually read an interview you did with a journalist, and you told her that you feel like having been closeted is the defining experience of your life in some ways?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that?
I think it trumps everything, because you're basically, I mean, there's an emotional part to this, but there's also just a factual part. You're basically by yourself inside your family. So you can't model after anything because you're not included in that. So you're creating all your own systems, and they live parallel to those systems, and so that's kind of similar to what's going on in dances to me, that there's a surface of the dance and there's an internal world of the dance, and those are kind of replicated, those experiences are replicated. But I think, genetics and local environment don't hold up against the closet. It's very, very a very determining factor in your life.
Can you just tell us more about why it's so determining?
Because you need to use language as a kind of armor and a kind of a different kind of housing in which to live that's kind of can fend off people who might kind of locate you as other. So you use your language to come closer to what they're offering to you, a kind of normative use of language, versus something else that you're feeling inside of yourself that is at odds with that, and it's uncommunicated. Earlier in life. In my situation, I mean, that's all changing now. I'm really happy about it, but I grew up in a very, conservative, small town. So.
And you also said in the same interview that for you, not only as, if you want to make a distinction between the choreographer and the person, but not only as a person, but as a choreographer too, it defined who you became as a choreographer. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, because since a lot of the sign systems that are being shared in the heterosexual world, you're not necessarily relating to them. Like I was thinking tonight, people watching men kissing. I used to watch women and men kissing on television and think like, oh, that's so unnatural. I wonder why they're putting it on television. I mean, inside of myself. And all of those things, and you just eat all of that. That's all unexpressed because there's no message that reflects that for you. So there's something about abstraction, and the kind of dance was like jumping into cold water for me because, part of my belief system is that I don't think you can really create definition in dance. You can create areas of convergence of ideas that turn into something that isn't a statement. And it kind of reflects, again, this situation that I lived. I was living two lives, one there and one inside of that, and sometimes those things came together and sometimes they were really divergent over time. So there's something about living in a world that is kind of doesn't have a set of systems that are standardized for you that speaks to abstraction. And I found that in dance.
Keep going.
that in dance, images are kind of detached from logic, or what we would call logic, and the kind of causalities that are enacted in dance don't have the same kind of purpose that they do in language or in stories or in communication that is looking for a direct end result. Yeah. And there's a kind of value system of multiplicity that I'm really interested in dance, and the way that it reflects consciousness, where language is resituated as kind of a stitchery on the outside of consciousness as opposed to the entire focus. So there's times in this dance, for example, when they come close to saying something and you start to read it as though it were a play or something, and then that kind of some other wind comes up and just pushes that away, not unlike being inside of your own mind. There's clarities and there's fogs, and all day long you're going in and out of those things, and they're not attached in any way. So there's a value system that comes up in dance that says maybe we should use that to formulate our world as opposed to the kind of pragmatism and reductive standardizations of behavior that we've chosen, because I don't think it's going so well myself. So this kind of form can suggest, there's a theatrical idealism that can suggest different ideologies and different ways of positing ways to live.
Like being in the world, yeah.
How to be in the world.
Right. And that speaks to me too about something about the rhythm of this work is so interesting to me. There's a kind of push and pull constantly where we have this notion of revelation and hiding that keeps going back and forth. There's a kind of advancing and retreating. There's brutality and tenderness, and all of those things are so much in relation to each other, so that they cross over and we don't even know anymore which is which in some ways. And it seems to me the larger rhythm. I'm sorry, I'm talking for you, weren't I?
No, it's great. This is all good stuff.
But the larger rhythm. But I'm sort of interested in that idea of the larger trajectory of the work of being in the rhythm. Can you talk about the way
Sure.
that's structured?
I mean, I think that there's something about the rhythms of real emotional trajectories versus the very present authorial hand of artifice that's being completely made present all the time. That this is both real and there's someone arranging it at the same time. So we're shifting between durational elements that are happening at the emotional level and kind of more metered elements or formal elements that are kind of like a patio that it's sitting on, but it has fences around it. So there's something going on between the use of metered time versus dream time versus their real emotional kind of what they're going through there. And the kind of convergence of those things and different allocation of what is kind of made frontal, which of those time ideas is made frontal is what's happening. The kind of, the hallucination of the work a little bit is how it goes in and out of those different temporal locations, I think.
I've seen the work several times now, and I've been struggling about trying to put my finger on something, which is the performances, which are absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, they're so amazing. Every time I watch them, I'm just like, I love these people, and they're just really giving people something to do that. It's really very brazen, and giving.
And there's something about, even though what we are taking from this is in some ways wariness and hiding, there's a kind of transparency about the performers themselves that are creating that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's kind of like there's something about a kind of empowerment in it, and there's a kind of just like easing into one situation that kind of says, finally, the whole spectrum is what we should all arrive at. This violence, this openness, this power. There is violence, there is tenderness. They reside close to each other in a similar weight. And that can somehow alleviate the dramas that we have, where violence becomes something that is just, almost glorified in our world, versus tenderness, which is kind of hidden, and maybe they can just kind of be a little bit more evened out somehow. But I think there's something about just the fact that these people, it doesn't really have to do with being gay or not. It's about saying, like, the differences in a theatrical setting of saying, there's artifice, and there's me, and there's you, and there's me, and there's artifice, and this kind of circular inhabiting of these different things kind of implicates the audience. They become a viewer, they become on stage almost. Sometimes there's the persona of the people on stage is of a viewer. They stop, someone else is doing something, and they enact something that you're doing. They kind of take on the role of the viewer. And sometimes the dancers are in the middle of something, and I'm asking them to really express it in a kind of really theatrical way, and then I'm saying, I want you to keep the shell of that and just empty out the persona. So there's all this kind of shifts going on inside of them that are not unlike what happens during a dance piece when you watch it, where you're like really with it, and then you kind of go off on something and you come back. I think that's an important part of dance that's not really appreciated. The idea that I can kind of send you on a little kind of synapse, philharmonic of the synapses for a minute, that it's just like you're off on your own thing and it's happening parallel to that. And it's what you're doing when you're talking to most people, and we never admit that. You know, you're never listening. You're like, I hope I got the point of what you said. You know. And I think what it would be like if someone said to me they wanted to tell a story about their mother, and you just interrupted and said, like, one time, this is what I'm thinking about. One time in the summer, you know, just something much more chaotic. You know, I wonder what that would, you know, what would happen if we were like that. I mean, I do know some people like that, actually.
So we watch dance, and we're looking at people who are pretending they're not being watched, right?
Mm-hmm.
But your performers here are actually enacting being watched, or being aware of being watched.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something that Liz LeCompte and the Wooster Group offered us in the 80s, and everyone took it in, or was urged to do it. Liz LeCompte is the director of the Wooster Group. And this idea that the actors are completely immersed in editorializing at the same time, that they're an audience to the fiction they're creating simultaneously, is something that I don't know if other people were affected, but that really affected me when I was very young, seeing that and reading about that. So I really want them to be kind of launching almost a kind of friction against my authorship, even. They're in many states in it. They're saying, I am me being pressed through you. And that's a basic kind of metaphor, a root metaphor of dance, is that, you know, there's a choreographer making you do something and you have to individuate through that. And then the metaphors are great for that. Language, religion, government, they're all doing the same thing to us. We're together doing the same things, but we can only go so far in what we do. And the same kind of thing in a dance. So you can see some people who are inches away from criminality, but they're just behaving in the world. You know? My brother's a surgeon. I always talk to him. I think, like, you're a serial killer that's trained up to the moment of the kill. You know? Like a border collie. They're trained to herd, but they get them just to the point before they kill. You know?
The question is he reporting, suggesting, none of the above, or all of the above?
All of the above. I think that the function of dance, especially as it relates to a replication of consciousness, is kind of presenting certitudes, and then right after that, exhibiting the futility of doing that, because there's basically chaos at work, and then people letting out real emotions for a while, and then reactions to that. I don't feel that and the older I get, I don't feel that I'm trying to make work that is a representation of me. What I'm doing is kind of creating an experience that exists in a time that we're in, and it's born of that time, but it's not a picture of it. It's just a document of it in an abstract form. And it's a constellation of different influences that come together to create whatever that is. It's not that I look at it and say, like, that needs to be fixed, or that needs to be better. I don't work from a good-bad paradigm. I say, like, that looks like itself, or I could help it become more like itself. And then it has these rules that don't necessarily obey standardized rules or mainstream rules, or I have an idea that I call unviable structures, dances that can go into these structural places that a building couldn't. Like, you can't put an I-beam at the side of a cottage with a skyscraper at the end of the I-beam, but you could create a dance that did that, or that was unruly in that way. And so that's part of the freedom of this thing, that I'm doing all these things at once and kind of allowing this document to come into being.
So can I just ask, so what are the rules then? You said there are rules.
Pardon me. The rules are, no one who's ever interviewing me should ask about the rules. No, I'm kidding. The rules are each piece. For me, for each piece, there's a process enacted, and it starts to suggest certain modalities that will be repeated in that. So certain things like the persona of the performers, how many times that will shift, or a kind of range of movement that I'm going to use. This one uses everything. I did another piece earlier called Poem that uses a much more restricted kind of dance language. And those things start to happen as I'm working. I start working and elements are suggested to me, and I try to allow those to grow somehow. I was talking this morning to another group and saying it's like the unfortunate people that bring up their children now by listening to them. And allowing a child who maybe wants to become a cashier, and you don't force them to be a lawyer. They're like, I want to be a cashier. So it's that kind of choreography where this thing starts to happen, systems are created, and you kind of allow that to come forth and say, this is a kind of momentary constellation of a process.
So you're the indulgent mommy.
I am kind of the mother who's saying, like, even though I don't want, I'm even trying to play with things like I have in the past, like, there's things in some of my dances that I don't like. But I'm thinking, like, why is the purpose of making art to put out to the people all the good things you've made and get a congratulations for that? Or, many parts of the days I pass through are horrifyingly boring. So that theater may not include that doesn't seem right to me. Beige or ennui could be a color. And they do, and they can create a framework where something that is, I want to be more important, I can give it a little moment of like, it happens in here definitely, where it kind of like falls apart and you're like, what? For then the thing to be born out of it,
The question is about the music in the work.
I've been working with the same composer since college, which is last year. And that's an old joke. That's an old joke, but I had it. For 30 years, actually, James Baker. And one of the first things that I realized about dance when I was really young is that I wasn't so interested in making dance to music. In fact, I found that problematic. The idea that the dance would be secondary to the music, or that you would have a finished piece of art and then make something to that is a different form than what I'm engaged in, I think. So I'm making these pieces, and they're made completely in silence, and I finish them in silence, and then the composer comes in, and I work very close with him when we create a score for it. This one we wanted to kind of refer to pop love songs, really generic pop love songs that, there's a song in the middle of it where the guy is singing all these long lines and he doesn't really say anything, but it's really lush, and it kind of points to this vapid romanticism that we all kind of have allowed into our world as a kind of representation of something that we would like love to be like. And so we kind of brought that in. There's some kind of quotations of people like Phoebe Snow and Ricky Lee Jones, placing it in a 70s modality. This is very different from what we usually do.
So this is very interesting, actually, isn't it? Because the gentleman's remarking about the emotionality of the work for those of us who watched it, and he's wondering about whether we're diminishing it by analyzing it, by talking about it. What do you think about that?
I think so many things about that. I mean, I feel like poor dance needs help sometimes. I think people want it to do something that it really can't do, and there are voices, and I hope mine is one of them, that can elucidate, without any reductive talk to people, the vastness of the potential of this form. So in these moments, I do think it's good to kind of talk to people and let people say, what are you doing? I don't really feel that I know what you're doing. And at the same time, I agree with you. I think the same thing. I remember, I talk about this all the time when I'm teaching my classes, that the first time I was just a bumpkin from upstate New York, and I was touring with someone in Washington, D.C., and I went to the National Gallery, and I turned the corner and I ran into a Robert Motherwell abstract painting, and I remember it was like a showdown, my first showdown with abstraction. And I thought I could go completely reactionary on this, or I could just let this in, and it was very emotional for me. I had no parlance about any visual arts or anything at that point. I just took it in, and I thought, I am completely addicted to whatever that is. So I would like to at once say, I'm glad that you had that experience. I hope that people have that experience. And there are moments like this where we come to do this together. So, you know, it's kind of like that. I'm very glad that you expressed that, though, because I feel like it's very emotional for me when I watch it all the time, too. So.
Left, right.